Welcome to the Vote Board, the election prediction podcast. We give you the inside information you need to handicap elections. I'm your host, the chairman of the Vote Board, David Dermer. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the Kentucky governor's race. Incumbent Governor Andy Beshear is up against Attorney General Daniel Cameron. The race is already at the far turn with its stretch run this November. Our guest today, former Kentucky House Speaker Jeff Hoover, really knows bluegrass politics. Keep in mind, betting on elections in the U.S. is not legal, but we could talk about betting on elections all we want. So sit back, relax, learn, and enjoy. Jeff Hoover, it's been a long time.
It has, David. Good to see you.
It's great to see you. It's only been 35 years.
Time has flown by, hasn't it?
It really has. And welcome to the Vote Board. And this is our kickoff show that we got you as a guest. And this is very exciting because you're a man who really knows Kentucky. All the history of Kentucky politics, you know the regions of Kentucky, and you know this hot governor's race that we're in the midst of. But for some background, I know Jeff way back in law school. We were classmates. And after graduation, Jeff went on to his hometown of Jamestown, Kentucky, which is in south central Kentucky. He had really established himself. He's a very, very prominent lawyer there. You can't get more prominent in Jamestown than Jeff Hoover. He specializes in personal injury work, in criminal defense, in family law, and also in some wills and estates, too, from what I gather. Family planning.
Do a little bit of everything.
Small town. Well, the good news is for our viewers is that if you run off the road in south central Kentucky, there's one guy you need to call because, you know, we all make mistakes. And Jeff Hoover is the man who knows everybody there and everybody knows him. So it's great having you. And what I feel so comfortable with having you, too, for this particular race is your just depth of knowledge. The fact that both your parents had served in the Kentucky legislature and that you, if I'm not mistaken, 24 years in the Kentucky legislature?
That's right, David.
That's 24. A long time. And from what I gather, you served in the minority party for 22 of those years. And then after 95 years, the Republican Party took over the legislature in Kentucky, and you were the Speaker of the House at that time.
That's correct. Yeah.
So you have a real breadth of knowledge of Kentucky politics, especially since you served under numerous governors, both R's and D's. And if you, Jeff, could tell us a little bit about Kentucky, the regions, and that dynamic in this governor's race.
Well, sure. And again, David, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. It's so good to see you. Kentucky politically is, and even culturally, socially divided into different regions. I think of it, most people think of it as four different regions. You have far western Kentucky, which throughout Kentucky's history, very conservative but voted strong Democrat. You have south central Kentucky, southern Kentucky, where I'm located for many, many years up until the mid-1990s when we elected a Republican congressman. That was the only district in Kentucky that was Republican. South central Kentucky, very conservative, strong Republican. Then you have a region that we refer to as the Golden Triangle. That is Louisville, Lexington, and northern Kentucky. There are 3 or 4 counties there in northern Kentucky that are suburbs of Cincinnati. That area is referred to as the Golden Triangle. And then the fourth region would be eastern Kentucky or Appalachia, Kentucky. So all of those areas different politically, different culturally, and it's what makes Kentucky unique politically, so to speak, year in and year out.
So what fascinates me about this race is the cross currents that you have going on in the governor's race. where you have a deep red state in the last presidential election,
Mm-hmm.
where Trump carried heavily by, I don't know what it was, 25 some odd points, somewhere in that neck of the woods.
Yeah, it was huge in
Very,
26.
very heavy. And you've got Governor Beshear, a Democrat, who maintains a high level of popularity. And also now he's being challenged by the Attorney General, Cameron, who is a black Republican, conservative, in a generally conservative state. So I'm curious, first off, what is your view? It's a fascinating race
It really is.
with all the different crosses going, and there's probably more of them going on than I'm mentioning internally that you know of more than I do, of course. What do you make of Beshear's popularity, and why is he be able to hold it for so long?
Well, Andy Beshear is popular um, for a couple of reasons. One, he comes from a family that has a long political history in Kentucky. His dad, Steve Beshear, served as a state legislator back in the 1970s, was then elected attorney general, served the state as attorney general. Then his dad was elected governor in 2007 and served 2 terms until 2015. So you have that as far as a family tradition, a lot of connections through the Beshear family. Andy himself was elected attorney general in 2015 and then governor in 2019. But during his term, David, what has made him popular today is he faced three catastrophic events, 3 events in Kentucky. One was COVID, which began in March of 2020 that we're all familiar with. Andy Beshear did, I think, from all accounts, Republican, Democrat, he did a remarkable job leading this state, keeping this state informed on COVID. For the first 3 months or so when COVID hit, he was on statewide television every afternoon with an update and had his health commissioner and others. And people really developed a sense of trust and a comfort feeling with him leading the state during COVID. So you have COVID, which began in March of 2020. You have tornadoes, which hit Western Kentucky that were devastating in December of 2021, I guess. Massive loss of property and several lives lost. Again, Andy Beshear was out front leading on that by all accounts.
Let's look at, so his popularity you attribute to his disaster relief efforts and
That's
how
right.
he's been able to be able to react so quickly to it. I'm wondering if the policies of COVID in Kentucky were felt by a good many people as being over, for lack of a better term, draconian than needed to be.
I think some people felt that. Beshear has received some criticism for some of those policies. One in particular, state police around Easter holiday weekend, where there was an executive order in place not to congregate in groups, and I don't remember the specifics. But I think state police went to some large churches and put notice on vehicles. You got to be careful. You're in violation of an executive order type stuff. And he has obviously received some criticism for that. Some of the things with regard to school closings and activities, he's received some criticism. But that's been tempered somewhat. It's there. It is an issue. It's tempered somewhat, like I said, by Beshear getting out front early on COVID, appearing on statewide television every day, and people just developed a comfort level with him.
They know him. His notoriety due to family history and these disasters and being on TV all the time. He becomes a political force.
It's tempered resistance and opposition to some of those policies. It's still there.
What's the economics going on now for people, everyday people in Kentucky? How is Beshear? I see that on a lot of his political his political website, etc. He's promoting his economic achievements, as most incumbents do. But what's your take on how people's lives are, the everyday Kentuckian, under his administration?
Well, so much is tied to national policies and national economics, and Kentucky's no different than other states with regard to unemployment, with regard to interest rates, all of the economic factors. Beshear is touting we have the largest surplus or rainy day fund, I think, in the state's history. He's touting that. Uh, he is the chief executive officer and the governor when that's taken place, but a lot of that credit has to go to the Republican majority in the House and Senate for putting those policies in place. But Kentucky's no different. You know, I think Daniel Cameron is beginning to run ads tying Kentucky's economic situation to Biden and his policies, and that is a positive factor for Cameron. There's no question about that.
That is starting to stick in your view.
It is.
Let's talk a little bit more about Cameron now that you mentioned him. And a popular attorney general in his own right who got through a very difficult Republican primary. Give me a little bit on his background in your assessment.
Well, he was sort of a protege of Senator Mitch McConnell. Daniel Cameron attended University of Louisville, played football there, worked for Senator McConnell, was in private practice, ran for attorney general sort of as an unknown, but as a very nice looking person, well spoken, and he won the attorney general. He has advocated and been out front on all the hot button social issues, abortion rights, some of the transgender, those type of issues.
Was he involved in some of those lawsuits also that he took the lead on? Yes.
Yeah, he took the lead on some of those. He's joined the National Attorneys General in some of the challenges to federal policy. You know, it was interesting when he announced, because the consensus among Republicans was that Cameron would seek re-election as Attorney General, and then he would run to succeed Mitch McConnell in 2026. But surprising to many Republicans, and out of the blue, he announces he's not running for Attorney General re-election. He's running for governor. And that caused, quite honestly, some consternation among many leading Republicans, because they thought he ought to wait another few years and run for the U.S. Senate. But he recently was married and now has a small child, and apparently his wife didn't like the thought of him commuting back and forth to Washington, D.C. and all that entails. And so, you know, he ran for governor and he got the nomination in a very competitive primary election. And he not only got the nomination, David, he won it rather convincingly.
I see that he's fashioned in his campaign now against Beshear. He's really embraced those social issues that you mentioned on the conservative end. Obviously, you had the trans issue, which garnered a tremendous amount of attention nationally, internationally, because I believe Kentucky has one of the toughest anti-trans bills in the country. And you have a governor that vetoed the bill, but then you have a super majority in the legislature that overrode the veto. And that kind of dynamic you don't see very often. You see either a veto and it doesn't go further, or a governor will, sign it one way or the other. As in Florida, we had a number of these socially conservative bills with a strong Republican legislature and a Republican governor that got through. That dynamic, how is that playing in this election as it relates to the regions of Kentucky?
Yeah, that issue is playing extremely well in Western Kentucky for Cameron. It's playing well for Cameron in South Central Southern Kentucky. not so much in the Golden Triangle of Louisville, Lexington, and Northern Kentucky. And I think it's a pretty strong issue for him in Eastern Kentucky.
Will, in your view, these conservative social issues outmaneuver the disaster relief economics and notoriety of Beshear as an incumbent? That's, I guess, the big question.
Yeah, I mean that's the big
Right.
question: how does it all play out? And you know, I if I were handicapping the race
That's
today,
what we do around here, Jeff.
okay, well, I would say it's probably a toss up, but a slight edge toward Beshear right now.
Okay.
Um, but both of them are spending so much money, and they both have been up on television. I don't think either of them have gone dark or had a period of time they weren't advertising since before the 1st of June. I mean, Daniel Cameron was up with general election ads 7 to 10 days after the May primary, and Andy Beshear's not stopped.
Is a lot of this money national money coming in from all over the place, or is there one that seems to have a bit more advantage when it comes to statewide money?
Well, I'm not sure. I haven't really looked
Mm.
at finance reports. There's only been one due, I think, since the May primary. But I know it's an extremely critical race for the national Democrats. I think I may stand corrected on this, but I believe Andy Beshear is the only Democrat incumbent governor who's facing reelection this year. And so you take that, you take
Well, you do have in Mississippi, you have the governor who's standing for reelection in November, and you also in Louisiana they have an open seat. So you only have three governor races going on in the country right now in November. So this one really is of great focus. Um, I think this. I really think this is the most interesting one because of what we're talking about. The Let me ask you another question, and this is something I think you really know the pulse of, and with your background. What do you make of? Obviously, you've got a Cameron, black attorney general, trying to be the first, from what I understand, or one of the first black Republican elected governors in the country. To be a first is something that really can motivate a vote. And in that urban vote, black vote in Louisville, in some of the other sectors that you were talking about, is that going to move and peel off what would be traditional Democrat voters to vote for the Republican? Or, and I know what you're thinking, or is that issue relating to the shooting in Louisville something that is going to play a role in that? Because that, in a tight race, can be a real swinger there.
You know, I could see where it would be an advantage to Cameron in Western Kentucky and maybe South Central Kentucky. You would think naturally in Louisville, which is a very strong Democratic area, especially what we refer to as the West End of Louisville, which is a highly concentrated African American population. Um, but as we spoke earlier before we went on, in Louisville, the situation regarding Breonna Taylor, who was shot by police who came to her apartment to serve a search warrant unannounced and resulting in her death, sparked an outcry, which ultimately led to the Department of Justice coming in just a couple, 3 months ago and issuing findings about the Louisville Police Department. Um, Daniel Cameron was in charge of the grand jury investigating those police officers, and by all accounts, lots of issues with that grand jury, the way it was handled, the information that was given to them, the options that were laid out before them. So, you know, it's caused a tremendous amount of unrest in Louisville, particularly in the West End, which is a highly concentrated African American. You know, that area of Kentucky was the determining factor in the 1995 governor's race between Democrat Paul Patton, who won, and Republican Larry Forgy. That area of the state turned out in huge numbers and put Paul Patton over the top. it'll be interesting to see if they turn out in huge numbers against Daniel Cameron, African American Republican candidate, because of their frustration and anger over the Breonna Taylor situation.
You think that could be a card that swings the election?
Oh, I think it could be, because I think it'd be close enough elsewhere in the state that, depending on the size of the turnout there, it could be a deciding factor.
Let me ask you one more question. You've got a few independents, a sprinkling of independents in this race. You've got John Hicks, I saw, was polling, maybe 1 or 2%, somewhere in there. Could that be a factor in this election if it's tight? Could he be shaving off some votes from one or the other?
I haven't given that a lot of thought. I don't think so, but I saw something the other day, and I had a conversation with someone about this. The most increase in newly registered voters in Kentucky over the past few months is independents. So, and I don't know the exact numbers, but I know they percentage-wise have registered more independent new voters than either Republican or Democrat. It may give an idea of the level of frustration that people are feeling with both parties, and much of that comes, I think, from the national policies of Republicans and Democrats.
Well, I tell you, Jeff, a lot of people are watching this race all over the country. It's a fascinating race, and you did give me your handicap on it a little bit through our conversation. Here over at the Vote Board, we're looking at it, and I tend to think you're about in the same neck of the woods. We're in agreement on that. I'd put Governor Beshear, the incumbent, at about a 55.6% probability, 4-5, with a money line of minus 125. So you got to bet 125 to get 100. Cameron, the AG, I'd put at 6-5 with a 45.5% probability and a plus 120. Got to bet 100 to get 120. So I think we're about on the same page. You think so? We're in the same area? Or were you have any kind of tweaking of that?
No, I'd say we're in the same area. I think a slight edge to Beshear today, percentage-wise of vote. I can't imagine it being more than 51.5 for Beshear.
Well, that's spoken as a guy who sat in as a Republican in the Kentucky legislature for 24 years. So we know you've got to, that's got to have gotten in you a little bit,
Well, there's no question this state is obviously trending Republican and continues to grow Republican. And I do think if Andy Beshear is reelected governor, he may very well be the last Democrat governor for many years.
That could be. And from your standpoint and the work that you did over many, many years, and I looked at those trend lines, how you increased slowly Republican registration every single year until now, just recently, the R's are more than the D's. So that is, that is something that to you and your Republican colleagues, I guess you should be very, very proud of that. And I'm sure it took a lot of hard work and a lot of effort, and I'm sure you traveled the state constantly, got to know everybody who's anybody in Kentucky. And I really want to thank you, Jeff, for taking the time to be with us here on the Vote Board and to give us your insight and analysis. And maybe as we get into the stretch run of this race, maybe we'll check in with you again to see where it is in November.
I'd love to do that, David. I really appreciate you asking me. And maybe we can get back on after the November election and see if we were both wrong.
We could do a little election reflection.
Yeah.
So once again, Jeff, thanks a million for your time. I greatly appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you, sir.